If you are planning to leave your RRSP untouched until age 71 because you think that is the safe move, you might be walking straight into a $95,323 problem. That is the 2026 threshold where the CRA starts clawing back OAS, and most of the advice floating around never mentions it. Here is the common story. Leave the RRSP alone, let it grow, and figure out the withdrawals later. Growth compounds, taxes wait, and everyone assumes that waiting is free. For someone around 60 years old sitting on $700,000 inside an RRSP, it is not free at all. By age 71, the CRA forces that account to convert into a RRIF, and a minimum percentage has to come out every single year whether you need the cash or not. Stack that mandatory withdrawal on top of CPP and OAS, and combined income can climb past the point where you are paying tax above 40%, while also losing 15 cents of every extra dollar to the OAS recovery tax. Today we are going through 10 mistakes that quietly drain a Canadian retirement, and the first one sits underneath most of the others. I have watched this catch careful, disciplined savers off guard more than once. We are calling it the income floor trap. Withdrawing from an RRSP earlier than age 71 can genuinely save you money, right up until it accidentally pushes you into the very clawback zone you were trying to avoid. So we will start there, with the plan most retirees never actually build, a year-by-year withdrawal strategy. I will walk you through the math behind a hidden $50,000 income floor, the kind of number that quietly turns good advice into an expensive mistake. The OAS recovery tax starts at $95,323 in 2026. Go over that number with your combined income from a RRIF, CPP, and even a small workplace pension, and you do not just pay ordinary income tax on the extra. You start losing 15 cents of every additional dollar straight back to the government. Push your income up to around $110,000, and that clawback alone can cost you close to $2,201 a year in lost OAS, on top of whatever tax bracket you have landed in. But that $95,323 threshold is not the whole story, and most people are already miscounting it, because it depends on income you might have coming in long before you ever touch the RRSP. Here is the part most retirement planning skips over. People picture their income in retirement as flat, one steady number from 65 until the end. It is closer to a U-shape. Income is high while you are still working, drops in the early retirement years if you delay CPP and OAS, and then jumps back up once RRIF withdrawals become mandatory at 71. That jump is where the damage happens, because two government pensions and a forced withdrawal all land in the same tax year at once. None of this means the RRSP was a bad idea. You spent decades putting money into it, and wanting to protect what is left of it is not greedy, it is just being careful with money you worked for. The problem is timing, not intent. So picture two versions of the same retiree at 62. In the first, they take nothing from the RRSP and let CPP and a modest part-time income carry them, landing in a 20% marginal tax bracket. In the second, they wait until 72 when the RRIF forces a $50,000 withdrawal on top of CPP and OAS, and the marginal rate on that chunk of income lands closer to 43% once the clawback is included. Same $50,000, nearly double the tax bill, just because of when it came out. That gap is real money, and it is avoidable. But there is a catch that makes the early withdrawal strategy backfire for some people, and it has nothing to do with the RRSP account itself. Most retirement planning assumes you have zero income between 60 and 65, so pulling from your RRSP in those years looks like free money sitting in a lower tax bracket. But if you still have a bridge pension paying $2,000 a month, or a rental property netting $1,500 a month, your income floor is already $42,000 before you touch the RRSP at all. Add a $30,000 RRSP withdrawal, on top of that $42,000 floor, and you do not land in a low bracket. You land in a higher provincial bracket immediately, the same one you were trying to avoid by withdrawing early in the first place. The strategy that works beautifully on paper for someone with no other income can quietly cost the person next door thousands, because nobody checked what their floor actually was first. I used to tell almost everyone the same thing: get money out of the RRSP early while your bracket is low. Then I worked with a couple who had a small consulting contract they genuinely enjoyed, nothing huge, maybe $20,000 a year between the two of them. That small bit of income turned their tax-saving plan into a tax-paying mistake because we never sat down and added their floor to the withdrawal before pulling the trigger. This is the trade-off nobody talks about. Keep the RRSP untouched and you are protecting today's tax bracket, but loading a bigger mandatory withdrawal onto your 70s. Withdraw early without checking your floor, and you can trigger this same problem 10 years sooner. Either way, the account does not care about your intentions. It only responds to the number on the tax return. So before you touch a dollar of that RRSP, run what I call the net benefit test. First, add up your actual floor, every bit of pension, rental income, or part-time work you expect between now and 65. Second, add the RRSP withdrawal you are considering on top of that floor. Third, check the total against roughly $55,000, which is close to where the second federal tax bracket begins. Once your combined total crosses that line, the tax advantage of withdrawing early starts to shrink fast, and past a certain point it disappears completely. This is exactly the kind of math that standard advice skips, because standard advice assumes everyone's floor looks the same. If you are watching this and realizing your floor is higher than you thought, that is worth sitting with for a second, because it changes the whole plan. It is a small shift in the numbers, but it is the difference between a plan that actually holds up and one that only looks good on a slide. And if that sounds like your situation, this channel is built around exactly this kind of math for people whose retirement does not fit the simple version of the advice. A lot of retirement plans include what is called a cash wedge, usually 2 years of living expenses parked in GICs so a market downturn never forces you to sell investments at a bad time. It is a good idea. The trouble is in how much of the portfolio that wedge actually eats up. On a $1 million portfolio, $100,000 in cash is 10%, barely a dent. On a $400,000 portfolio, that same $100,000 is 25% of everything you own, sitting in an account earning GIC rates instead of growing with the market. That is the cost nobody puts on the brochure. The smaller your portfolio, the more a standard cash wedge quietly shrinks your long-term growth. Picture 2 retirees with $400,000 each. One keeps a quarter of it in cash and misses a year where the market recovers 7%, giving up roughly $7,000 in growth they will never get back, since that money never compounds again. The other uses what is sometimes called a tiered buffer instead. 6 months of cash for immediate needs, another 18 months in a laddered GIC that matures in stages, and the rest stays invested and working. With GIC rates in 2026 sitting around 4.5%, and the long-run average on the Canadian stock market closer to 7.2%, that gap adds up every single year you hold too much in cash. It is not that cash is wrong. It is that most people hold more of it than their portfolio can actually afford. There is no single right number for every household. It depends on how much of the portfolio you can actually afford to freeze in something that barely grows. And even if you get the cash wedge exactly right, there is a second leak that has nothing to do with cash at all, one that shows up quietly inside a TFSA that most people assume is completely tax-free. Here is something that surprises a lot of Canadians. The TFSA is tax-free in Canada, but the United States does not recognize it that way at all. If you hold U.S. stocks inside a TFSA, the IRS still applies a 15% withholding tax on any dividends those stocks pay out, and there is no treaty protection to stop it because the treaty only covers RRSPs. It sounds small until you run the numbers. Say you hold $50,000 in a company like Microsoft or Apple, paying a dividend yield of about 0.7%. That withholding tax costs you around $52.50 a year. On its own, that barely registers. But leave that same US stock sitting in a TFSA for 20 years, and that leak compounds right alongside everything else, quietly costing you thousands of dollars in growth that should have belonged to you, not a foreign government. The fix is simple once you see it. U.S. dividend payers generally belong inside the RRSP, where the tax treaty actually protects them, not inside the TFSA, where nothing does. Canadian dividend stocks are exactly the opposite. They belong in the TFSA, where they were always meant to sit. It is a small piece of housekeeping, moving the right holding into the right account, but it is the kind of detail that gets skipped when nobody is looking at where each investment actually sits. But what happens when your RRSP room is already full and there is nowhere left to move those U.S. holdings? There is a swap strategy that solves this, and it is one that most people managing their own portfolio never even know exists. Meet Robert. He is 62, has $350,000 in his RRSP, and owns his home outright in London, Ontario. Compared to the bigger numbers we have been talking about, Robert feels like the strategies in this video are not really built for him. He is wrong, and the next few minutes show why. None of that makes Robert unusual. It makes him fairly typical of what a modest, well-managed retirement actually looks like in this country. In Robert's first year of retirement, the market drops 20%. Nothing unusual, markets do this. But Robert also needs a new roof that year, an $18,000 job that cannot wait for the market to recover. Without a plan, Robert does the thing almost everyone does under pressure. He sells equities to cover the roof, locking in a loss on money that was never supposed to be touched during a downturn, and he loses the chance to recover any of that value once the market bounces back. Now picture the same year, but Robert has a home equity line of credit already set up before he needed it. Instead of selling stocks down 20%, he borrows the $18,000 against his paid-off house, paying interest around prime, plus half a point to 1 full point, roughly 7% for the 6 months it takes him to pay it back once his portfolio recovers. He pays some interest, yes, but he never sells a single share while it is down, and the roof gets paid for either way. This is what people miss when they assume the fancier strategies only apply to portfolios with an extra zero on the end. A line of credit against your home, set up in advance, does the exact same job as a cash wedge for someone whose portfolio cannot spare $100,000 sitting in GICs. The tool is smaller, the logic is identical. Most of the strategies that sound complicated are really just the same handful of ideas, resized to fit a smaller number. Robert's actual biggest risk, though, has nothing to do with the market at all. It is a bill his kids will not see coming, and it depends entirely on which province he lives in when he passes away. When someone dies in Canada, their estate often has to pay probate fees before anything gets released to the family, and how much that costs depends almost entirely on which province they lived in. In Ontario, the estate administration tax runs $15 for every $1,000 of the estate, over $50,000, close to 1.5% of everything above that threshold. In Alberta, the fee is capped at $525, no matter how large the estate is. Same country, same kind of estate, a difference that can run into tens of thousands of dollars, depending on the postal code on your last address. Nobody chooses where to retire based on probate rates, but the difference still shows up on the final bill regardless. Over the next several years, More than $1 trillion is expected to pass from one generation of Canadians to the next, the largest wealth transfer this country has ever seen. Provincial governments know this too, and probate fees are one of the quiet ways they collect a share of it, without ever sending you a bill in advance. It is written into provincial law, not into any single financial product, so nobody along the way is obligated to point it out to you. The fix, in most cases, does not require a lawyer or a complicated trust. Holding property in joint tenancy with a right of survivorship, or naming a direct beneficiary on RRSPs and TFSAs instead of leaving them to the general estate, lets that money bypass probate entirely and pass straight to the person you intended. I remember helping a family in British Columbia who realized, just in time, that their vacation cottage was not held jointly. One signature before it was too late saved that family close to $20,000 in probate costs on that property alone. It is one of the simplest fixes in this entire video, and one of the easiest to forget. Nobody plans to leave that kind of money on the table. It just happens quietly, one unchecked beneficiary form at a time. There is a reason so many people leave RRSP withdrawals until the last possible moment, and it has nothing to do with math. It comes down to loss aversion fighting against tax aversion. We hate paying tax so much that we will make choices that cost us more overall, just to avoid handing money to the CRA today. It feels wrong to pull money out of an account that is still growing. Watching a balance go up every year and then choosing to shrink it on purpose feels like killing something that was working. That instinct is not irrational. It is just aimed at the wrong target because the account was never entirely yours to begin with. Nobody sits you down early on and explains that a slice of that balance already belongs to the government by design, so it is an easy thing to forget over 30 years of quietly contributing. Try thinking about the RRSP differently. It is not your money sitting in a growing pile. It is closer to a joint account you share with the CRA, one where they have never told you their exact percentage yet. Every dollar you withdraw at a 20% tax rate today is really just buying the CRA out of their share early, at a discount, before they show up later and demand 40% or more once RRIF withdrawals and clawbacks are added together. Seen that way, withdrawing earlier is not giving something up. It is locking in a better price on a bill you were always going to pay eventually. That reframe does not make the decision easy, but it does make it a lot clearer. Here is where this comes together into something you can actually do. 3 steps in order. First, calculate your real income floor for 2027. Add up every source of guaranteed or near guaranteed income you will have before RRIF withdrawals even start: pensions, rental income, part-time work, anything steady. Second, check that number against your OAS projection. If your combined income is creeping toward $95,323, that is your signal to stop making new RRSP contributions and shift new savings into your TFSA instead, where growth never counts against that threshold. Third, verify the beneficiaries listed on every account you hold: RRSPs, TFSAs, and anything else that allows a named beneficiary. This single step is often the difference between money reaching your family directly or getting tied up in probate for months. It usually takes no more than 20 minutes with your account statements in front of you, and it is the kind of 20 minutes that saves your family months of paperwork later. None of these 3 steps require anything complicated. They just require sitting down and actually doing the math before the RRIF conversion forces the decision for you instead. Do these 3 things and you are already ahead of most Canadians heading into retirement. But there is one mistake left that can undo all of this progress on its own, and it has nothing to do with numbers. It is trying to handle every part of this alone, without anyone checking the plan against your actual situation. A second opinion is not a sign that you got something wrong. It is just how a good plan gets tested before it becomes permanent. Retirement was never really about how much you manage to save. It is about how much of it you actually keep after your income floor and the clawback rules take their share. If any of this made you rethink your withdrawal order, your beneficiaries, or which province your estate might end up dealing with, that is exactly the kind of math this channel focuses on every week. If it helped, subscribing to Brian's Canadian Retirement Playbook means you will not miss the next one. You worked hard to get here. Do not let one overlooked number in your 60s quietly decide what your 80s look like. Small mistakes compound just as quietly as good decisions do, and they rarely announce themselves until years later.